That night, she quietly climbed out of her bedroom window to meet her two best friends. And just a few hours later, those same girls counted to 3 before stabbing her more than 50 times. That sentence alone sounds like something out of a nightmare. But what makes this case one of the most haunting teenage murder stories in modern American history is not just the brutality of what happened. It's the fact that the victim never believed she was in danger. Skylar Neese was not lured into a stranger's car. She was not kidnapped from a parking lot. She was not ambushed by some predator lurking in the dark. She willingly snuck out of her house in the middle of the night to meet the two people she trusted most in the world. Two girls she laughed with every day, texted for hours, called her best friends. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this story is that the moment Skylar climbed into that car, she still believed she was safe. She thought she was simply going out with friends. She had no idea the decision to kill her had already been made long before that car ever pulled up outside her house. No idea the two girls waiting for her had already planned exactly how she would die. No idea that this late-night ride would be the final night of her life. And just hours later, deep in the cold darkness of the West Virginia woods, when her two best friends looked at each other, began counting under their breath, and rushed her from behind with knives in hand. The last thing Skylar managed to say before she died was one simple question. Why not please stop? Not help me. Not a scream. Just why? As if in the final moments of her life. What hurt most was not the blades cutting into her skin, but the fact that the people holding them were the ones she loved most. And maybe that is why, more than a decade later, this case still sends chills through millions of people. Because this is not just a murder case. It is a story of betrayal in its darkest form. A reminder that sometimes the people capable of destroying you are not your enemies. They are the ones sitting beside you, laughing with you, hugging you, and waiting until the moment you let your guard down completely. To understand what led to that horrifying night, we have to go back to Morgantown, West Virginia, in the summer of 2012. A quiet college town where people believed things like this simply did not happen. Not New York, not Chicago, not some city known for violent crime. Just an ordinary suburban community where parents believed their children were growing up safe. And in that community, Skylar Neese was the picture of a normal teenage girl. She was 16 years old, a good student, working part-time at Wendy's, living a relatively stable life. She was not especially rebellious. She showed no signs of living dangerously. She was simply a typical teenager dealing with the everyday drama of growing up. But like many girls her age, Skylar's world revolved around her friends. And at the center of that world were two names, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The three girls were nearly inseparable. They were always together, always hanging out, always taking pictures. If you looked at their social media back then, they seemed like the perfect friendship trio every teenage girl dreams of having. But like many things in life, appearances never tell the whole story. According to people who knew them, things began changing in the months before Skylar disappeared. Tension slowly started building within the group. Small arguments became more frequent. And most noticeably, Sheila and Rachel began growing closer to each other, while Skylar increasingly felt herself being pushed out. On the surface, it sounded like ordinary teenage drama. And most of the time, maybe it was. But sometimes, childish drama can become something much darker when it falls into deeply disturbed minds. Not long before she vanished, Skylar posted a tweet that people would later obsess over after everything came to light. She wrote, "The things you do make me never want to trust you again." She never said who she was talking about, but it was obvious she was referring to someone close to her. Maybe by then Skylar already knew her friends were hiding something. Maybe she was beginning to realize she was being betrayed. Maybe deep down she sensed that something was wrong. But she never could have imagined that feeling would become the final warning before her death. On the night of July 5th, 2012, Skylar finished her shift at Wendy's and came home like she always did. Nothing seemed unusual. She talked with her parents, went upstairs, told them she was tired and heading to bed. It was a completely ordinary night. A night that to her family should have been nothing more than another normal evening. But shortly after midnight, the security camera outside the house captured Skylar opening her bedroom window, climbing out, running across the yard, and getting into a sedan parked outside. Inside the car were Sheila and Rachel. That footage would later be replayed countless times on television. And what made it so heartbreaking was how completely comfortable Skylar looked. She showed no hesitation, no fear, no suspicion. She got into that car the way any teenage girl would get into a friend's car for a late-night drive. But for the two girls sitting inside, this was not a casual night out. According to their later confession, everything had been planned in advance. The knives had already been packed. Supplies had already been prepared. The plan had already been discussed. They were not picking up their friend. They were picking up their victim. The car left town and drove toward a remote wooded area near the Pennsylvania border, a place far enough away that no one would hear the screams. A place isolated enough that no one would witness what was about to happen. And when the car stopped, Skylar stepped out first, still completely unaware, still believing this was just another harmless late-night drive. She walked ahead while Sheila and Rachel followed behind. Then they looked at each other. According to Rachel, the two girls began counting. 1, 2, 3, and then they charged. The two teenage girls attacked their own best friend from behind with knives. They stabbed her over and over again, one strike after another, more than 50 times. 50. That was no longer panic, no longer self-defense, no longer an accident. That was rage, hatred, overkill. The kind of violence that only happens when someone truly wants to erase another person from existence. And in the middle of that chaos, Skylar managed to ask the only one question. Why that question would later become the most haunting part of the entire case. Because imagine what she must have felt in that moment. Not just the pain of being killed, but the horror of realizing the people murdering her were the same two girls she trusted enough just hours earlier to sneak out and meet in the middle of the night. After making sure Skylar was dead, Sheila and Rachel tried to dig a hole to bury the body. But the ground was too hard. They could not dig deep enough. So instead, they dragged her body into the woods, covered it with branches, and left her there. Then they got back in the car, drove home. And somehow, the most disturbing part of the story had not even happened yet. Because what those two girls did next is what truly horrified America. The next morning, when Skylar's family realized she was missing Sheila, and Rachel showed up acting like two devastated friends. They helped search for her. They comforted her parents. They cried. They posted messages mourning her online. They stood beside her family while knowing full well she was lying dead in the woods. Think about the level of coldness that takes. Not just to murder your best friend, but to calmly look her parents in the eye, pretend to grieve, and play the role of innocent victim for months afterward. At first, police believed Skylar may have run away. a teenage girl climbing out of her window in the middle of the night, sounded exactly like a typical runaway case. But the deeper investigators looked, the less things made sense. Skylar did not fit the profile of someone who would run away. She was responsible. She never missed work. She did not disappear without reason. And when police began questioning Sheila and Rachel, things only became stranger. Their stories were too perfect, too identical, too rehearsed, as if they had practiced every word in front of a mirror dozens of times. But eventually, cracks began to show. Small details stopped lining up. One remembered a different route than the other. One recalled turning one direction, while the other described something else entirely. And to experienced detectives, that was a classic sign of a fabricated story. But suspicion alone was not enough. Investigators needed hard evidence. And then the first real breakthrough came. Phone records revealed that both girls had been in Blacksville around 4 o'clock that morning, directly contradicting their claim that they had been home asleep. Then surveillance footage from a gas station captured Sheila's car traveling in that exact direction during the night. Suddenly, this no longer looked like a missing person case. It was beginning to look like homicide. Even then, police still could not prove murder. There was no body, no confession, no forensic evidence tying anyone directly to the crime. The case began to stall. Months passed. And during all of that time, the two killers continued living normal lives, going to school, hanging out with friends, posting on social media, laughing, smiling, all while hiding one of the most horrifying secrets imaginable beneath the masks they wore every day. Then in early 2013, Rachel's show finally broke. After months of living under the crushing weight of guilt, fear, paranoia, and psychological pressure, she could not take it anymore. During a police interview, Rachel burst into tears and confessed to everything. Every detail, every step of the plan, every stab wound, every final word Skylar spoke before she died. And when investigators heard that confession, even they were stunned. Because despite suspecting murder for months, very few truly believed that two teenage girls were capable of something so cold-blooded. Rachel then led police to the location where they had hidden the body. Skylar's remains were finally found. Not long after, Skylar's DNA was discovered in blood inside Sheila's car. At that point, it was over. There was nowhere left to run. Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Sheila pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence. But even though the case was officially closed, one question still remains, one many people feel has never truly been answered. Why? Why kill her? Why do it that way? Why more than 50 stab wounds? Why count to 3? Why pretend to cry beside her grieving family afterward? Some believe the motive was jealousy. Others say it came from the toxic relationship between the two killers. Some think Skylar simply knew too much about secrets they wanted hidden. But the truth is, no explanation has ever felt large enough to justify that level of brutality. And that is why this case still lingers in the public's mind to this day. Because this is not just a story about murder. It is a terrifying reminder that evil does not always look evil. Sometimes it does not wear a mask. It does not come charging out of the darkness with a knife. It does not look like a monster. Sometimes it dresses like you, smiles like you, sits next to you in class, calls you its best friend, and waits until the moment you trust it most before showing you what it truly is. Because the dark truth of this case is simple. Skylar did not die because she trusted the wrong stranger. She died because she trusted the right familiar face. And sometimes, that is the most terrifying kind of evil there is. If you think this case is disturbing, there are darker ones you've never heard of. Cases where the truth stayed hidden for years, or was never found at all. Subscribe to Silent Case Files to uncover them